Welcome. It's time for another patch from scratch. Today, I'm feeling chaos. I'm gonna get a little noisy, gonna get a little feedbacky, gonna make a little spaghetti, and that's the plan for today. We're gonna make some sound. I don't know where it's gonna go. If that sounds like fun to you, come along for a wonderful ride. Sometimes when I don't know what I want to do, I think that means it's time to just mix up the noise. So we're going to start, I think, with the Interstellar Radio. Let's just listen to this. We're going to create some feedback with it and use that as the base for whatever we do next. So on its own, it can create a variety of abrasive textures and noise. But it gets a little more unpredictable and wild as soon as you take the error input into the signal in. This is a patch from the manual called the noise oscillator patch. It does not disappoint. But there's nothing to stop us from putting anything we want in the middle of that feedback path. So let's start by just augmenting the standard patch from the manual, the noise oscillator with the Interstellar Radio, and try running some other things into it. What happens if we take that output and run it through a bandpass filter first? What do we get out of that? I like it. Let's move the filter around a little bit because right now we're emphasizing certain frequencies, but I think we can get something really nice by starting to move the filter around. And let's just take that same input that we have here and run that. I like what we're working with here. It's not so hissy, full spectrum noise. It's got a nice little rhythm to it here. We're getting something with a little more structure to it. The next thing that I think it needs is a little more amplitude variation, though. And so I think what I want to do for that is we're just going to run it through a VCA. We're going to chop up the sound a little bit here. And the way that we're going to chop up the sound is using the output that we have here. Let's run that into the sport modulator. I think it's about time for a nice stepped smooth random patch. But let's first get this set back up. Now, what happens if we just take the coupler output, the comparator output rather, of the sport modulator here? That's perfect. Now we have some nice choppy amplitude variation for what we're working with here. And the way that the support modulator 2 is set up when the couple switch is engaged. To briefly explain this, the top section and the bottom section are both sort of slew limiters, sample and hold, cycling modulators. But in this case, we have our noise running into the input. And this is, with the couple switch up, set to a sample and hold. Same thing like this. And the value changes based on the rate, so we can get smaller changes in how different our output is. Now we have more dynamic change. Now the values are changing closer together. And whatever we output from here goes to the bottom section, and the bottom section is smoothly moving between the values that we output from the top. And as we smoothly move, every time that we sort of complete that movement, or not exactly because of the way that the comparator works, but close enough, we update and get a new value. So this is jumping between values, this is sliding between values, and as this slides between values, it creates new time points where the top jumps around. Needless to say, we get stepped output, smooth output for our noise source that we bring in. All right, now we have some nice noise. What next? I think I want to be keeping this as one stream here. I don't want to mix things together, but I want to impart more jagged order, more rough structure onto what we have here. So we have plenty of tools available to us. Maybe we get some additional feedbacking going. And if we're going to do that, I think one of the best ways to do that is with some envelope following. So let's think about this. What do we want to envelope follow? We have our final output here, but okay, I'll bite. Yeah, let's take that final output and let's run it into the boundary as an envelope follower. And let's use this signal to control some of the rate stuff that we have going on here. The nice thing about this is we can use the same boundary envelope in the 4-quadrant multiplier on the boundary to get an additional signal that we're working with as well here. I want some more high frequency content here, but I want to sort of leave everything else where it's at so that we're building on what we have here. So let's turn to the angle grinder to get some additional roughness built up into this sound. Let's go out of the angle grinder into input B on the multi-filter? Or we could mix this in along with our signal here, but then where to add this into our loop? Let's try in alongside the multi-filter and see if that's going to create too many negative consequences for what we're doing over here. We're not going to get a lot of that high frequency content because we're running through the bandpass output here already. So let's change our plan just a little bit here. I think what we'll do is we'll jump through the angle grinder. We'll take everything we've been listening to so far, and we will grind that signal. So I'm gonna go into the angle grinder and out here. And I like manipulating the grind comparators here. So let's do that using, I don't know, the output of the angle grinder into the boundary. Like I said, we have the boundary set up as an envelope follower. So when we run the angle grinder into the boundary, we can sort of follow the shape that we're getting out here and use that to self-patch and sort of modulate the angle grinder. So let's run out and into that grind comparator we were playing with here. Somewhere with this a little bit, I think. Let's grab another output on the angle grinder, run that down to the other rate control on the sport modulator. That's getting some nice chaos. We're definitely getting into spaghetti land here a little bit. This connection is a let's try it type of thing rather than a I have a plan type of thing. But I love what it does. You hear we have a little more like structure. Here it's just sort of doing its own thing. It sort of is like in this little ball. Now we're really pushing on it a little bit here. And I like the result that we get out of that. We still have these two CV outputs from the sport modulator though, the stepped output and the smooth output. And I think that now's maybe a great time to start using those. There's a variable output here on the multi-filter. And so what if we take the output, and there's a voltage control over the variable output here. So we can shift between low pass, band pass, high pass. What if we take the smooth side of the sport modulator here? Nice. Starting to like hiss and yell and then retreat a little bit. work with that. What about the stepped output? There's something... Let's try another one of our grind comparators here. With that. We're developing some nice, gnarly, noisy chaos. And so, just to recap the patch as it stands right now, we've started with the Interstellar Radio and feedback patching on the Interstellar Radio. But instead of going right back into itself, we're running into the multi-filter and then back into the Interstellar Radio. Now, in addition to that, we're taking the output, that noise that we get from the Interstellar Radio, and we're using that as the input to our stepped, smooth SSG style modulator here. And we're using that to do some amplitude modulation using the comparator on that. Then we're using that to put some additional modulation into the system. We're using the boundary as an envelope follower on that chopped up noise output that we have here, and using that as an additional modulation source. And then we're running the output of that chopped noise into the angle grinder, where we're sort of grinding another tone into it using the comparators and the feedback on the angle grinder. So we have our input, we have comparators that are sort of subtracting from that input, and that's connected up to the filter on the angle grinder, the spin section, which is getting all this sort of feedback on it. Now, I'd love to add the Koshalin in here. Could be a nice way to scatter frequencies around. Though I'm not sure if I want to add it directly to the output of what we have here. I think instead, it might be nice to loop it in somewhere in our set of feedback loops that we have here. The same way that we created the feedback, a more complex feedback for the Interstellar Radio by running it through the multi-filter. So do we have a similar type of loop setup? I think we do, coming out of the two spin outputs on the angle grinder here. Now let's see. Let's remind ourselves where these go. One of them is going to modulate the bottom section of the sport modulator. The other one is going into the boundary and then back into the angle grinder. That seems like a very nice candidate to frequency modulate here. Let's try that. I'm going to attenuate it first just to make sure that we don't go too hot into the Koshalin, because yeah, we otherwise might. And then we're going to take the output here. Run that in. Let's see if we can play around with this to find some unexpected behaviors. because I'm a sucker for symmetry, I'm realizing we have two outputs on the angle grinder. We have 2 channels on the Koshalian. So why not? Let's see if we can also get some fun behavior by running the other one into the other channel. Right, we're gonna make sure those are both on unipolar. Bring that down a little bit. We're gonna run this right output back down here. And play around with finding something that feels right. Okay. I think we've got some interesting development happening here. There was a moment when I was playing around with the angle grinder where I turned it down low, so instead of sort of high frequency content, it was doing lower frequency manipulation of the sound. And I want to go back and play around with that more. I feel like there's some fun rumbly stuff we can get here. Straight from the stepped output to the angle grinder is creating too obvious of a behavior from me. It either needs some attenuation or some additional processing. So let's just, for starters, give it some attenuation and see if that helps at all. It's a little bit of a overuse of the matrix mixer for the single channel. Maybe we'll come back and get something else in there, but for the moment, think we're gonna work with that. I think we've got something that I'm generally happy with here. If I was to add one more thing to this, I think what I would do is take an output from the Interstellar Radio and run that in here to the clock divider. And use one or two of these clock divider outputs to further manipulate things. We could try messing with the boundary on our envelope follower, the bound input. Moving maybe a little too fast to be obvious. Grab another one. There's a nice little timbral change there. I think we've got some nice structured chaos here. This is sort of maybe a wild ride. I have no idea exactly how this is going to feel until we look back on it. But something that I find with chaos like this is that this looks like an absolute mess of a patch at this point. But if you aren't careful about how you approach it, your mix of patching might not have as much effect. The structure is so important to chaos and to the way that a sound is rough. Otherwise, you get something that sort of occupies a undifferentiated space of boringness if you're not careful with how you patch. In order to get that real roughness and depth of sound, which I do think that I have here to a nice extent, you'd need to be thinking about how you're routing your sound through, how you're sort of building these structures of roughness around that. And I hope some of that has come across in this video. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. It's another patch from scratch.